A mine so deadly that every global giant refused to touch it. A $7 billion bet that the entire world called insane. 10 years later, China just proved everyone wrong, and what they built in the mountains of Peru is, rewriting the rules of global power. Right now, beneath one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, something extraordinary is happening. It's a place where the air is too thin to breathe, where storms bury entire camps for months, and where the ground itself seems determined to kill anyone who dares disturb it. For decades, this location remained untouched, not because of a lack of treasure beneath the surface, but because extracting it seemed fundamentally impossible. We're talking about a copper deposit so massive it could power millions of electric vehicles, fuel entire smart cities, and reshape the balance of industrial might between nations. And yet, some of the biggest names in mining, companies that move mountains for a living, took one look at this site and walked away. Then came China. In a move that shocked industry analysts and drew mockery from critics worldwide, Chinese investors poured $7 billion into acquiring what many called the Hell Mine. The skeptics were loud, the odds seemed insurmountable. But a decade later, the laughter has stopped. Because what China managed to pull off in the frozen peaks of the Peruvian Andes isn't just a mining success story. It's a masterclass in turning the impossible into reality. So, what exactly is happening at this remote site? How did Chinese engineers crack a puzzle that stumped the world's best? And what does this mean for the future of global resources, technology, and power? Let's dig in. Imagine standing at an altitude where your lungs struggle with every breath. The temperature hovers around -10 degrees Celsius on a good day. The air contains just 60% of the oxygen you'd find at sea level. Your head throbs, your vision blurs. Even lifting your arms feels like climbing stairs after running a marathon. Welcome to Las Bambas. Perched over 4,000 meters high in the Peruvian Andes, this copper deposit sits in one of the most hostile environments humans have ever tried to work in. The altitude alone would be enough to defeat most operations, but nature wasn't satisfied with just that challenge. For more than 200 days every year, violent snowstorms sweep through the region, burying equipment, freezing pipes solid, and making outdoor work essentially suicidal. Early exploration teams learned this the hard way. One group arrived with state-of-the-art gear and ambitious plans, only to abandon their entire base camp after a 2-week blizzard made it clear that nature had no intention of cooperating. Equipment designed to withstand Siberian winters simply gave up. Machines built for the toughest conditions on Earth became expensive paperweights. But the weather is just the opening act. Getting anything to this location is a logistical nightmare that would make military planners weep. There's exactly one road leading to the mine, a narrow, winding trail of gravel and ice that clings to cliff sides and crosses terrain where one wrong move means watching millions of dollars in machinery tumble into oblivion. Large mining equipment can't make the journey in one piece. Every major component has to be disassembled, transported separately, and reassembled on-site at costs running triple what you'd pay for a conventional mine. In 2013, executives at Glencore, one of the world's mining superpowers, decided to test their luck. They needed to move a massive crushing unit to the site. The convoy made it surprisingly far before disaster struck on a particularly treacherous cliff section. When the dust settled, more than $50 million had vanished over the edge. The machine was destroyed, the road was damaged, and the company's appetite for Las Bambas died on that mountainside. But here's where the story gets even more complicated. The region surrounding Las Bambas sits within a protected watershed feeding into the Amazon River system. Local environmental laws don't just suggest careful water management, they demand it with standards so strict they make most international regulations look lenient. Copper ion content in wastewater must stay below 0.1 milligrams per liter. To put that in perspective, That's roughly 150 times stricter than typical drinking water standards. Violate those rules, and governments come down hard. A Canadian mining operation learned this lesson the expensive way back in 2009. Their development attempts caused measurable environmental damage, triggering a swift response from Peruvian authorities. The company faced a $20 million fine, immediate suspension of all activities, and a forced withdrawal from the project. Their investment evaporated, their reputation took a hit, and Las Bambas went back to being the mine nobody wanted. Industry veterans began calling it something else: the thorny rose, beautiful in potential, deadly to touch. Every major mining corporation on the planet looked at Las Bambas and came to the same conclusion: this wasn't worth it. The technical challenges were too severe. The environmental risks were too high. The cost-benefit analysis didn't work. Better opportunities existed elsewhere, in places where gravity, weather, and altitude weren't actively trying to destroy your operations. The consensus was universal: Las Bambas would remain unexploited. And then China said, "We'll take it." When news broke that Chinese investors had committed $7 billion to acquire Las Bambas, the international response ranged from confusion to outright ridicule. Industry publications ran skeptical headlines. Analysts questioned the decision publicly. Competitors watched with barely concealed amusement, certain they were witnessing a spectacular miscalculation. But to understand why China made this seemingly irrational bet, you need to understand something fundamental about modern manufacturing and the resources that power it. China produces more goods than any other nation on Earth. Its factories churn out everything from smartphones to solar panels, from high-speed trains to advanced batteries. And nearly all of that manufacturing depends on one critical element: copper. The wiring in your devices, the motors in electric cars, the infrastructure of smart grids. Copper is everywhere, and the demand keeps growing. Here's the problem: China doesn't have enough of it. The country sits on massive land area, 9.6 million square kilometers. But when it comes to copper reserves, it controls less than 4% of the world's proven deposits. Chinese mines produce copper, certainly, but the quality is often poor and the quantities insufficient. By 2014, China was importing over 4.5 million tons of refined copper annually, with 80% coming from Latin American nations like Chile and Peru. That dependency created a vulnerability. In that same year, workers at Chile's National Copper Company went on strike. Production slowed, global supply tightened, and in just 24 hours, copper prices inside China jumped 5%. That single strike sent shockwaves through manufacturing sectors, delayed production schedules, and demonstrated exactly how fragile China's supply chain had become. For Chinese industrial planners, this was unacceptable. You can build the world's most advanced factories, train the most skilled workforce, and develop cutting-edge technologies. But if someone else controls your raw materials, you're building on sand. One labor dispute, one political shift, one trade disagreement, and your entire industrial base becomes hostage to forces beyond your control. Then came the electric vehicle revolution. China wasn't just observing the shift to sustainable transportation, it was leading it. Domestic production of new energy vehicles was accelerating rapidly, with projections showing annual output could exceed 5 million units. And every single electric vehicle requires approximately 4 times more copper than a traditional combustion engine car. The motors, the battery systems, the charging infrastructure, all of it demands copper in quantities that would make 20th century manufacturers dizzy. Suddenly, securing reliable, long-term copper supplies wasn't just important, it was existential. That's when Las Bambas stopped looking like a nightmare and started looking like a solution. The deposit contains proven reserves of 10 million tons of copper, not potential reserves that might exist, not theoretical calculations based on limited drilling. Proven, confirmed, accessible copper that could feed Chinese manufacturing for years. If extracted efficiently, this single mine could supply a substantial portion of what the country's electric vehicle industry needed to sustain its growth. So Chinese banks, with government backing, assembled a syndicated loan package that set records for cross-border mining investment. $7 billion flowed toward a project that everyone else had abandoned. Western observers called it reckless. Competitors predicted failure. Financial analysts questioned the math. But China wasn't gambling. It was securing its future. Fast forward a decade. Pull up satellite imagery of the Las Bambas region today, and what you see might not compute with what you know about the mine's history. The treacherous dirt road that once claimed equipment and tested nerves? It's now a paved, four-lane transportation corridor engineered to handle heavy industrial traffic safely and efficiently. The barren, hostile mining area where early expeditions failed? It's been transformed into a modern industrial complex covering nearly 100 acres, with automated processing facilities operating around the clock. Copper, lithium, and other valuable materials extracted from deep within the Andes now move continuously along specialized freight routes, crossing mountains to reach Pacific ports, where they're loaded onto vessels bound for Chinese refineries and manufacturing centers. What was impossible became routine, and the skeptics went quiet. But the real question isn't what China built. It's how they managed to build it in conditions that defeated everyone else. The Chinese engineering teams that arrived at Las Bambas in those early years walked into a perfect storm of challenges. Their first 3 months on site were spent battling relentless sandstorms so severe that setting up basic camps became a daily struggle. Engineers worked in gas masks, conducting surveys while visibility dropped to near zero and dust infiltrated every piece of equipment. The altitude remained merciless. Equipment designed for sea-level conditions malfunctioned constantly at 4,000 meters. Traditional machinery couldn't handle the low-oxygen environment or the intense ultraviolet radiation that bombards high-altitude sites. Chinese teams had to collaborate with domestic research institutions to develop specialized tools, excavators, drills, and processors specifically engineered for these extreme conditions. Then came the landslides. The Andes aren't just tall. They're geologically active and unstable. A single heavy rainfall triggered a massive slide that wiped out newly constructed access roads. More than 30 workers found themselves stranded halfway up the mountain, cut off from supplies and rescue vehicles. Helicopter airdrops became the only way to keep them alive while emergency teams carved out new routes through the debris. The mine's location in an active seismic zone meant that construction progress could be erased overnight. The main tunnel system had to be completely reworked 3 separate times after geological shifts compromised structural integrity. Each rebuild cost hundreds of millions of yuan. Each setback pushed timelines further into the future. Most companies would have cut their losses and retreated. Chinese engineers kept pushing forward. They deployed drone-based surveying technology to map terrain with precision impossible for human teams working in those conditions. Using that data, they identified routes for transportation corridors that balanced accessibility with safety, then brought in specialized excavation equipment to carve pathways through solid rock and cliff faces. Worker safety became a technological challenge requiring innovative solutions. Every person on site now wears a smart helmet that continuously monitors heart rate, blood oxygen levels, and other vital signs. If someone shows signs of altitude sickness or physical distress, alerts go out immediately to medical teams positioned throughout the complex. But perhaps the most revolutionary change came in how the actual mining is conducted. In Lima, Peru's capital, Chinese investors built a $100 million remote operations center. Through fifth-generation wireless networks and advanced automation systems, engineers sitting in comfortable control rooms can now direct excavators, manage processing equipment, and oversee blast operations happening 4,000 kilometers away in the mountains. Roughly 80% of the work that once required human presence in hostile conditions can now be performed remotely. Las Bambas became a smart mine, a showcase of what happens when you combine resource extraction with cutting-edge technology. In 2023, this system proved its worth dramatically. Sensors detected the early signs of a significant landslide developing in a section of the mine. The automated warning system triggered immediately, giving site managers just enough time to evacuate all personnel from the danger zone. 10 minutes later, thousands of tons of rock and earth crashed through areas where workers had been standing moments before. 0 casualties. Not because of luck, but because of systems designed specifically to protect human life in an environment determined to take it. But technology and engineering prowess alone weren't enough to make Las Bambas a success. China faced another challenge that couldn't be solved with excavators and remote control systems: local opposition. In 2021, communities surrounding the mine began expressing serious concerns. Influenced by international media coverage questioning Chinese resource extraction practices, many residents feared that mining operations would contaminate their water supplies, damage ecosystems, and disrupt traditional ways of life. Protests grew, tensions escalated, and ultimately, operations at Las Bambas were forced to shut down for 50 days. Global copper prices responded immediately, spiking as one of the world's largest producing mines went dark. Chinese operators faced a choice. They could push back, leverage legal agreements, and force operations to continue. Or they could acknowledge the concerns and address them meaningfully. They chose dialogue. Multiple rounds of discussions were held with the Peruvian government, local community leaders, and environmental groups. Chinese representatives listened to specific grievances, identified legitimate concerns, and worked to find solutions that would satisfy both operational needs and community welfare. The results were tangible. Chinese companies committed to increasing financial dividends flowing to local communities from mining profits. They invested 80 million yuan in infrastructure that residents had been requesting for years, including the Kudatai Bridge, a structure that cut commuting times for surrounding villages by 4 full hours. On environmental protection, actions spoke louder than promises. Advanced water treatment systems were installed to ensure that effluent standards not only met but exceeded Peruvian regulations. Monitoring equipment now tracks environmental conditions continuously, with data made available to government inspectors and community representatives. A 368-hectare reforestation project was launched in partnership with 34 surrounding communities. Over 600,000 juvenile trout were released into local waterways to support ecosystem recovery. These weren't token gestures for public relations purposes. They were substantial, verifiable environmental investments. The Heart of Las Bambas program was established to maintain ongoing communication between mine operators and local populations. Regular community forums, open house events, and consultation sessions gave residents direct channels to voice concerns and suggestions. Transparency replaced secrecy. The impact on local attitudes was measurable. Today, 60% of young people in towns surrounding the mine actively seek employment there, attracted by wages roughly 3 times the regional average. What started as a relationship marked by suspicion and conflict evolved into something approaching partnership. 10 years after China made its controversial $7 billion bet, the financial returns have exceeded even optimistic projections. At current market prices, with copper trading around $10,000 per ton, the 2.7 million tons already extracted from Las Bambas represent a value of roughly $27 billion. But that's just what's already been mined. Remaining recoverable reserves exceed 10 million tons, implying a total resource value approaching $100 billion. Every year, approximately 400,000 tons of copper concentrate leaves Peru through the port of Matarani. 23 days later, ships arrive at Nanjing, where the material feeds directly into smelters operated by major Chinese industrial firms. From there, refined copper becomes essential components in electric vehicle motors, photovoltaic power station cables, advanced electronics, and countless other applications driving the global economy toward electrification. But the economic impact extends far beyond Chinese borders. For Peru, Las Bambas has become a genuine economic engine. In the Apurimac region where the mine operates, per capita GDP has more than tripled, from $1,300 in 2014 to over $4,000 in 2023. The mine contributes more than $1.7 billion in tax revenue, accounting for roughly 5% of Peru's entire annual fiscal intake. That money funds schools, hospitals, roads, and social programs across the country. Recognizing the strategic importance of efficient logistics, China invested an additional $120 million in upgrading the port of Matarani, increasing copper transportation efficiency by 50%. Plans are underway to build a local smelter that would process copper concentrate into semi-finished products before export, dramatically increasing the value-added component that stays in Peru. There's even a proposal to construct a solar power facility at the mine site itself, potentially making Las Bambas one of the world's first major mining operations powered entirely by renewable energy. A fitting evolution for a mine that supplies materials essential to the clean energy transition. China has also supported the renovation of the Belgrano freight railway system with a $200 million investment. The first phase is now fully operational, providing annual transport capacity of 2.65 million tons while reducing transportation costs by 80%. That infrastructure doesn't just serve Las Bambas, it benefits Peru's entire export economy. As global demand for copper continues climbing, driven by the explosive growth of electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, and smart infrastructure, the strategic value of Las Bambas keeps increasing. What looked like an expensive gamble a decade ago now appears to have been a brilliantly calculated move in a much larger game. Step back and look at the bigger picture, and Las Bambas becomes more than just a mining success story. It represents something more significant, a fundamental shift in how resource security is achieved in the 21st century. For generations, controlling natural resources meant either having them within your borders or maintaining influence over the nations that did. Economic power and military might were the traditional tools for securing supplies. But China demonstrated a different approach at Las Bambas, one based on solving problems everyone else deemed unsolvable. Where others saw obstacles, Chinese engineers saw technical challenges to overcome. Where critics predicted failure, Chinese planners saw long-term strategic value. Where competitors walked away, Chinese investors committed the capital necessary to turn potential into reality. The $7 billion that seemed reckless in retrospect looks remarkably prudent. The mine that was supposed to be impossible to operate is now producing hundreds of thousands of tons annually. The investment that drew mockery is generating returns that competitors can only envy. But perhaps most importantly, Las Bambas proves that resource security in the modern era isn't just about controlling land or negotiating favorable trade deals. It's about possessing the technical capability, financial resources, and strategic patience to develop resources in places and conditions that defeat conventional approaches. China didn't conquer Las Bambas through military force or economic coercion. They did it by engineering their way through problems, investing in communities, respecting environmental requirements, and maintaining commitment when short-term results looked discouraging. That's a model that can be replicated, and it's already being applied to resource developments in other challenging locations around the world. The global map of resource control is being quietly redrawn, not through wars or diplomatic pressure, but through capabilities and commitments that others haven't been willing to make. Las Bambas might have been the first major example, but it certainly won't be the last. What happened in the frozen peaks of the Peruvian Andes over the past decade is more than a business story. It's a demonstration of how determination, innovation, and strategic thinking can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. It's proof that when everyone else says something can't be done, that often just means nobody's figured out how to do it yet. China turned a mine that defeated giants into one of the most productive copper operations on Earth. They transformed mockery into admiration and risk into reward. And in doing so, they secured resources that will power not just their own industrial future, but potentially shape the balance of technological and economic power for decades to come. The $7 billion gamble, it paid off. And the world is still calculating exactly what that means. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our deep dives into the stories reshaping our world. Hit that notification bell because the next chapter in global resources, technology, and power is being written right now, and we'll be there to break it down for you. Until next time, keep questioning what's possible.